Now, without much further ado, I would like to welcome our guest of honor who will inaugurate us into our ceremony this afternoon, this morning, this evening, depending on where you are. Ambassador William Lacy Swing, who is an American and United Nations diplomat, and he has been a 6-time ambassador under 4 of the 10 US presidents under whom he has served. He's also been a special representative of 2 United Nations Secretary Generals, as well as the chief of the UN peacekeeping missions that's in the Congo DRC and the Western Sahara. You may also be interested to know that he has been ambassador in several African countries, including South Africa, the Democratic Republic of Congo, Nigeria, Liberia, as well as Haiti. And I think he holds very special places in his heart for these postings. An interesting fun fact there is that the posting that he had in South Africa was shortly before Nelson Mandela was released from prison. So some very interesting times throughout his mission. Many of us also know Dr. Ambassador Swing from his 10 years as Director General at the International Organization for Migration, which eventually became a United Nations agency in 2016. In 2016, where he was really instrumental in setting this, as well as increasing the membership and the global footprint that the International Organization for Migration had. And I think he set really a tone there. He has been celebrated or decorated by many foreign governments, including France, Germany, Liberia, Niger, Djibouti, as well as the Sovereign Order of Malta. He has received various awards, including the lifetime contributions to the American diplomacy, and several universities in the US and in other parts of the world have awarded him with honorary doctorates. He also speaks quite a number of languages, including French, Germany, and several African languages. And for now, as William had said, he has retired. And we are really, really honored that he could find time it's quite late in Kuala Lumpur to join us and just lead us into an inauguration for our ceremony today. Ambassador William Lacy Swing, please, you're welcome.
Is there any connection problem?
Yes, shall we try and unmute him, Rakesh?
Can you hear me all right?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. All right, good. No, let me just say I'm sort of quite out of date, as you know. I've been gone for a while from the subject that we're talking about. I just want to say it's really an honor and a privilege to be able to share with you some thoughts. And I want to thank the organizing groups there, very impressive, for the invitation to join you, and congratulate you on this very important theme. I will stick pretty close to my text since I've been out of it for a while, and this is a pre-pandemic text that I have that I was working on sometime before, and I try to bring it up to date now. I have just, as always, 3 points. My first point is a factual point. The second one is analytical. And the third one is a series of recommendations with regard to migrants and the diaspora and development. While it's not true today, perhaps because of the pandemic, there has never been a time in human history when we've had more human beings moving across the globe on a scale that we just never seen this before. And out of every 7 persons in this 7 billion world is a migrant. In other words, 1 7 billion world. This is more than 300 million international migrants and about 750 million domestic migrants. China alone, everything's big in China, as we know, but China alone has more domestic migrants than there are international migrants. And yet the international migration, international migrants crossing borders still represents only 3% of the world's population. And that's been fairly constant since the 1960s. However, the numbers have increased and continue to increase exponentially. And that is because of a demographic oddity, a phenomenon, namely that the world's population quadrupled in the 20th century for the first time in recorded history. Not likely to happen again soon. So were these international migrants suddenly to be able to constitute themselves as a nation, they would have a population slightly smaller than that of Brazil and slightly larger, larger than that of Brazil and slightly smaller than the population of neighboring Indonesia. I'm speaking to you from Malaysia. Now, getting to the point of development, the $600 billion, and that figure may be out of date, is probably higher than that now, that diaspora and migrants send home annually in the form of remittances. Several interesting points. First of all, it is twice the amount of all international economic aid. Secondly, it is almost equal to all international foreign investment, believe it or not. And thirdly, it is roughly equivalent to the GDP of one of the smaller European Union member states, such as Finland, for example. In addition, according to Forbes magazine, almost 50% of all CEOs in the United States are either immigrants or descendants of immigrants. So this is some of the facts about migration. Now, I would argue that international migration is going to continue to be a major force in our world because of the drivers and the root causes. And there are about 10 of these. I'll go through them, tick them off quickly. First of all, demography. We have an aging global north in need of workers at all skill levels. You have a largely unemployed, youthful global south with a turgid rate of job creation. Secondly, the demand for labor shortages in the global north, labor surpluses in the global south. Thirdly, the disparities, north-south economic imbalances. And a World Bank IMF paper noted, for example, that large-scale migration is going to be a permanent feature of the global economy for decades to come. Degradation of the environment, climate change, distance shrinking technology, where you can get from one point to the other quickly and easily. The digital revolution, we know what's going on. What I call desperation or survival migration, people moving in many cases because they either are victims of gang warfare, the economy, they've given up on the economy, or otherwise. Disasters, natural and human-made. We just had a major typhoon in Philippines, stretching from, you have conflicts now, armed conflicts stretching from the western bulge of Africa to Southeast Asia, where I live. Now we have, therefore, migration, demography, and urbanization, the 3 major population trends of our time. They're likely to transform our world inexorably into a much more multicultural, multi-ethnic, multi-religious, multilingual world. Now, my second point is more of an analytical point of what I've just told you. We live in a world on the move, yes, but this world on the move is moving through a perfect storm. What's the analysis here? What do I mean? This is a world that is responding in a counter-cyclical fashion. It's a world adrift, having lost its bearings in the middle of this perfect storm. And some of the elements include the following. First of all, we have the greatest forced migration since World War II. We have some 68 million persons forced to move. It's probably even higher now. 25 million refugees, 43 million internally displaced persons. And we need to bear in mind, first of all, not more than 1% of the world's refugees are settled annually. Secondly, refugee returns are at a 30-year low. And thirdly, the average camp time for a refugee is about 25, 26 years. In addition, you have a further 75 million living precariously only 1 meter above sea level. Kiribati, for example, here in the area where I am, has already bought land in Fiji to take its people when that 1 meter rise or more occurs. We have unprecedented increasing anti-migrant sentiment. I used to be able to say that my country, the United States, accepts more refugees every year and migrants than the rest of the world together. I can't say that anymore. Today, Canada accepts more refugees than the United States. So things are changing. We have harmful, misleading pronouncements by world leaders that basically endanger migrants' lives and deny us their contribution. We have what I call the travel agents of death, human smugglers and traffickers, earning $35 billion a year off the backs of poor. We have a public confidence in government's ability to manage or their will to manage the migrant flow, appalling dearth of political courage, serious erosion of international moral authority, including the Security Council, violation of international humanitarian law on all sides in these various conflicts. Countries are building walls rather than bridges. They are turning inward. It's a world afflicted with what Javier Solana used to call migration and refugee amnesia. IOM, we mustn't forget, IOM and UNHCR were founded in 1951 to take Europeans ravaged by the Second World War to safe shores and new lives. We mustn't forget that. Hungarian President Viktor Orban, he's forgotten that 62 years ago, 200,000 Hungarians were taken and fled to open arms in Austria and former Yugoslavia. And so these are some of the elements that constitute a perfect storm as regards international migrants and the diaspora. But I have a third point. I don't want to abuse my time, but I want to make a few suggestions about how we need to ensure that migrants and the diaspora continue to contribute to development worldwide. There are numerous ways in which we can contribute directly to management of international migration. Let me mention three. First of all, we can deliver the compelling historical and contemporary evidence and arguments to demonstrate that migrants and the diaspora are in the national interest and are contributing and always have to development. There was a recent study, not so recent anymore, probably 4 or 5 years ago, by the McKinsey Global Institute and IOM that demonstrated that although migrants constitute only 3% of the world's population, migrants produce 9% of global GDP. Moreover, that is 4% more GDP than they would have produced if they had stayed at home. In the U.S., immigrants start companies at twice the rate of native-born Americans. Almost half of the companies in the Fortune 500 were started by immigrants or their children. So migrants and the diaspora are helping to address the demographic deficit in OECD countries. UN data forecasts that the population of Europe and other developed countries will decline by nearly 25% in the coming years. The populations of Europe and Japan have already started to shrink. Demographers tell us that Japan will lose 1/3 of its population well before the end of the century. And this is in a country where people have the highest rate of living to be 100 or more. Europe already has the world's oldest population in relative terms, and it lacks the replacement rate to avoid this. In other words, more people dying in Europe than being born. Immigration has enabled the U.S. to maintain its population levels and to avoid the demographic deficit of Europe and other rich countries because of immigration. That's unfortunately changed a lot in the last couple of years. We're down to 18,000 last year. It used to be at 120,000 or more, and it will sink even lower before the end of this year. Now, the long-range health of the United States, as with many other countries, is going to be hurt by large-scale declines in immigration. Even our retirement and Social Security systems rely on workers who come from abroad. When I was in Geneva with IOM, the Swiss openly stated that their generous Social Security and welfare schemes would be in difficulty were it not for the large number of migrants in Switzerland, who admittedly are largely European, but nonetheless. So if we're going to reap the benefits of migration in these aging societies, governments are going to need well-developed, comprehensive, and far-reaching policies to help integrate migrants and diaspora. Second sub-point under my final point is perspective. We urgently need to provide a balanced perspective on migrants and the diaspora. For example, someone who's a hero for me, German Chancellor Angela Merkel, she declared confidently, "Wir schaffen das." She recognized that the 1.5 million migrants who came across the Mediterranean in 2015 represented only less than 1% of Europe's population of 550 million. Therefore, not a crisis, but a manageable reality. Now, she must have assumed that some of the 27 other European Union states would come forward and say, we'll take some too. In fact, only Sweden and Austria did, and that didn't last very long. So she ended up with most of the 1.5 million, and she's handled it very well. In a similar vein, I was invited here along with the UN High Commissioner for Refugees to Bangkok by the Thai, Malaysian, and Indonesian governments in 2015. because they had 7,000 Rohingya refugees from Myanmar out on ships in the Bay of Bengal and the Andaman Sea. And suddenly they were all aflutter. What do we do? And this is talking about 3 countries who have a population of more than 300 million. We said, look, we have doctors and other people waiting to try to help these people. Just let them come ashore, and we will help them. We'll help you. But it shows you how quickly people lose perspective. Now, we can also assist governments in providing perspective to help people deal with what I think the real issue boils down to, which is one of identity. My identity will be threatened if we accept these people. Now, here, governments and NGOs need to have programs of public education and public information to educate people and inform them as to what these migrants and diaspora, eventually diaspora, are going to mean for the country. Final sub-point under my third point in terms of recommendations, we need to begin to destroy the stereotypes. These are stereotypes that put migrants' lives in danger and denies us the contributions that they historically have always made. There are a number of these stereotypes. There are many of them. Let me just give you a couple. Migrants are not needed. On the contrary, we know that some of the jobs that are going to be done in these countries are not going to be done by our local people because they don't want them. It's beneath their dignity and beneath their wage scale, perhaps. Migrants will do them. The second one is migrants steal our jobs. And statistics reveal that migrants, in fact, create more jobs than they steal. If you want to use the word steal. There's a poverty reduction strategy. Third stereotype, migrants will bring a criminal element into our community. The truth is that migrants commit fewer crimes than our own citizens, in part because the last person they want to see is a police officer or a military officer. And then there's another one. Migrants exploit our welfare system. Well, recent World Bank and IMF studies showed that migrants contribute more in taxes than they consume in social services. So the sooner a migrant has a job, the sooner that migrant is going to pay taxes. And then a final one, migrants pose a security threat. There is absolutely no evidence that any of the 3.5 million refugees that IOM took to the United States since 1980, that any of them have ever committed a terrorist act. In fact, most terrorist acts in recent years have been what we call homegrown, whether it was San Bernardino, California, Orlando, Florida, Paris, Nice, Barcelona, Brussels. So we need to get rid of these stereotypes if we're going to be successful in helping migrants and diaspora to make the contribution we know they will make. So let me wrap up, conclude by where I began, namely that migrants and diaspora are not a problem to be solved or a crisis to be resolved, but rather they are a human reality, as old as humankind and as young as today, a human reality to be managed. Migration is part of our DNA. Migration is, at one and the same time, 3 things in conclusion. Inevitable, given the driving forces I outlined for you. It is necessary if jobs are to be filled, skills to be available, and development to occur. And finally, it is highly desirable if we have the right policies to manage migration responsibly. So I will conclude with that, and thank you very much for your patience, overly long remarks. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for those remarks.
You're most welcome. It's an honor.
I'm drawn to think back to the very first time that I sat in a room and heard you speak, and I think that even though you do say that your message is pre-pandemic, it's something that is still very relevant even today. Some of the key messages that you have been driving through, and those that you have just outlined to us, and I think your very last statement is so powerful, you know, in saying that it's, you know, migration is a human reality that we need to manage, as well as it being inevitable, necessary, and highly desirable. And then I think these next couple of days will dive us into the different parts of the migration space that
Thank you very much.